For nearly a decade now, the Zelda franchise has suffered a sizable rift in the player base. With Breath of the Wild came a wholly new style of Zelda game, which brought in tens of millions of new fans, but it left many fans of the older games feeling forgotten. This fracture between old fans and new fans is still extremely prevalent today. Neither Tears of the Kingdom nor Echoes of Wisdom went far enough to fully bridge the divide between old and new style Zelda. When you ask most fans of traditional Zelda games what they miss the most about the old formula, you'll get a variety of answers, but the most common among them will certainly be dungeons. The focus of this video will be dungeons, specifically exploring the question, what makes the dungeons of traditional Zelda games so good, and why can't the modern style of Zelda incorporate this? We'll briefly go over the history of Zelda dungeons and how they developed from game to game. We'll analyze the strengths and weaknesses of old school dungeons, as well as the newer style dungeons found in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And finally, using what we've found, I'll talk about what I hope is in store for us in the future. From the very first Zelda game, dating back to 1986, the Zelda dungeon was in essence a labyrinth, a gauntlet of rooms full of enemies and obstacles to navigate. In the original Zelda and its sequel, The Adventure of Link, combat was the primary challenge. There were puzzles, but usually these would be quite simple in nature, with block pushing or hitting a switch to activate a hidden door being common. Locked doors required small keys that could be found within the dungeon itself, or in the very first game, even bought from merchants in the overworld. Eventually, you would find a chest with a special item inside, such as a bow or a boomerang. This item would make combat more manageable. It could also open up areas you were previously unable to explore, and by the end of the dungeon, when you faced down the boss, you would have the necessary tools and experience to defeat it. This formula of dungeon, although simple in its execution in the first two games, would carry forward for decades. Each consecutive game developed upon these basic concepts, becoming more complex, more fully realized. Combat, while certainly remaining an important component, took up a smaller ratio of the dungeon gameplay in relation to the puzzle elements. 12 years after the original Legend of Zelda, a little game on the N64 released that standardized the Zelda dungeon formula. Many fans argue that technically A Link to the Past took many of the same steps to the standardization 5 years earlier, which is certainly true and shouldn't be discounted, but I'm of the opinion that The Legend of Zelda from 1986 established the Zelda dungeon, while Ocarina of Time not only standardized it, but did so in 3D. The sense of exploring a real 3D space with tangible dimension was unlike any other. Cause and effect, complex geometry, audio design, it all came together perfectly. It even introduced the idea of targeting enemies, a concept that seems obvious to us today in a world where Elden Ring and God of War exist. But that's the thing, nearly every 3D action game to this day draws inspiration from Ocarina of Time because it did it so right from the beginning. Ocarina of Time also introduced the idea of elementally themed dungeons that carry forward to this very day. Fire, water, forest have all appeared time and time again in different iterations of Zelda. Ocarina of Time was a landmark game not just for the Zelda series, but for the gaming landscape as a whole. To this day, it's revered as one of the greatest games ever, holding the #1 spot on Metacritic with a 99 score. Each game after Ocarina of Time took the basic formula, not just of the dungeons, but the game structure as a whole. A young boy of little renown is suddenly thrust into an adventure by the force of fate. He must fulfill a great destiny involving a princess named Zelda and an evil man named Ganondorf. By overcoming trials and acquiring MacGuffins, he becomes stronger, more capable, eventually able to wield the Master Sword and stand against Ganondorf, defeating evil and saving the princess. If Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom was your first experience with the series, and you haven't gone back to play the older games, you might be thinking, well, that sounds just like Breath of the Wild. The old games must not be all that different from the new ones, right? Yes and no. You see, each Zelda game largely retells the same story over and over, hence the legend. The details change, the locations vary, but almost every Zelda game hits these same broad story beats. In the gameplay structure, and especially the dungeons, you might not realize how different the pre-Breath of the Wild games were. If you're an old school fan, you know this, but basically for a 13-year stretch from 1998 to 2011, Zelda games were riffing on the formula standardized by Ocarina of Time. Each game had some new gimmick, some gameplay mechanic the team experimented with. Majora's Mask with its time-looping mechanic, the Wind Waker being set on the Great Sea. Twilight Princess is loved by many and criticized by others for its close adherence to the formula of Ocarina of Time, its biggest differentiation being the ability to transform into a wolf, and a more realistic art style. And Skyward Sword on the Wii had its motion controls and was set above the clouds in the sky. When this game released, it was beloved by critics, but many fans criticized the motion controls as well as the game's structure, calling it overly linear and hand-holdy. The game sold decently, but not anywhere close to that of Twilight Princess, and on a system with an install base of over 100 million. The general vibe in the air was that something needed to change with Zelda. Fast forward to 2014. Series producer of The Legend of Zelda, Eiji Aonuma, appears on screen during a Nintendo Direct. He speaks on the original 1986 game featuring a vast explorable world, freely being able to choose which direction you go in. He says that the transition to 3D came with hardware restrictions that made it difficult to convey the same sense of exploration in a large world. He describes one example of how they overcame this problem in The Wind Waker, by stringing together enclosed islands in the Great Sea. But you still couldn't cut through the boundaries wherever you'd like to explore that world, he says. Cut to him unveiling our first glimpse at the new Zelda game. Yep, this is our first look at what we would come to know as Breath of the Wild. He explains how the puzzle solving begins the moment you step into the world, deciding where you'll go, how you'll get there, and what you'll do when you arrive. For fans of the series, this was a breath of fresh air. Following the smash success of Skyrim in 2011, and games like GTA and Red Dead Redemption demonstrating how impressive you could make an open-world sandbox, Skyward Sword felt to many like the clearest indication that the old Zelda formula had run its course. It was stale, dusty, and antiquated. Clearly the franchise was in need of a shakeup. I personally feel a lot more favorably about Skyward Sword, and I always have. But this is generally the fan consensus we're talking about here. And even myself, a diehard Skyward Sword defender, was excited for this new era of Zelda that Aonuma was teasing. It just made sense for Zelda, Nintendo's grandest series, to take the plunge into being open world. Now we're in 2017. Breath of the Wild releases to overwhelming critical and fan praise. Review sites are calling it a landmark video game. Fans are calling it the greatest game ever made. Much like Ocarina of Time had done 19 years prior, Breath of the Wild was establishing a new formula. A formula in which player freedom was given priority. Gone were the special items of old, replaced by the Sheikah Slate and its world-altering abilities, Magnesis, Stasis, Remote Bombs, and Cryonis. These 4 abilities, all acquired within the first couple hours of playtime, are all you need to complete the game. That means you can set off in any direction you want and find success. Or failure. The only gate to your progression is really your own ability. The shrines and divine beasts allow you to bolster your hearts and stamina, which makes combat easier. But, as Aonuma said, the puzzle solving begins the moment you step into Hyrule. It's about where you want to go, how you'll get there, and what you'll do when you get there. That can mean booking it to Calamity Ganon and seeing credits in under 5 hours. Or you can spend 200 hours meandering around Hyrule, completing each and every side quest, finding all 900 Koroks, and conquering the 120 shrines. These 4 abilities also mean that the dungeons of Breath of the Wild operate completely differently from those of classic Zeldas. In the old games, the unique items you discovered in dungeons would allow you to interact with mechanisms in the overworld that were closed off to you. The bombs found in Dodongo's Cavern would let you blow up that boulder in Hyrule Fields, revealing a cave in which you'd find a reward. Dungeons weren't the only place to find items, though. The double claw shot of Skyward Sword is received after completing the Lanayru Desert's Silent Realm. These claw shots allow you to access the Lanayru Sand Sea, a previously inaccessible area that is necessary to advance the story. It's not entirely accurate to say there are no dungeon items rewarded to the player for completing the Divine Beasts. After defeating each beast's respective Blight Ganon, you receive an ability from the associated champion. These abilities don't really unlock anything in the world, but they do improve your combat and exploration abilities. They are certainly not necessary in any way to complete any objectives in the game, main or otherwise. This, of course, makes the Divine Beasts themselves entirely optional. This isn't inherently a bad thing. In fact, it's partly what makes Breath of the Wild a great game. The vision Aonuma, Fujibayashi, and the entire team had for Breath of the Wild was one where player agency is king. As we know from the 2014 Direct, the entire game is structured around this philosophy, and it's part of what made it such an incredible experience in 2017. Now, here's where I want to pause this dungeon series overview in order to narrow our focus to the strengths of old Zelda dungeons. Tears of the Kingdom largely follows the same dungeon structure as Breath of the Wild, with a couple noticeable improvements. Echoes of Wisdom will come back later in this video to reinforce some points I'd like to make. In a game like Breath of the Wild, where player agency or freedom is given priority over everything else, there are certain benefits of the old formula that were left behind. To illustrate this, let's take a look at some of the strengths of the old dungeons. I'll be using examples from Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. First and foremost, the best, most memorable dungeons usually have a distinct atmosphere. Something that tells you this is a place different than the outside world. Perhaps a place that no one has set foot in ages, and often a place that is unsafe, where you are not welcome. Music and visual design are most important in creating this atmosphere. When you walk into the Forest Temple of Ocarina of Time, and hear that unsettling ambient synth come in, it immediately clues you into what kind of place you're in. An ancient, forgotten structure hidden deep in the labyrinthine Lost Woods. In Twilight Princess, the ethereal high-pitched strings and choir pads of City in the Sky give the sense of loftiness, reaching the heights of an ancient forgotten civilization. The quirky wind instruments remind you that this is the Uka we're talking about. Those little chicken bird weirdos. And whatever the heck this is would drive even the most stable Hylian insane after long enough. Visually, the old games almost always had distinctly different dungeons. Jabu Jabu's Belly would never be mistaken for Inside the Deku Tree. Dragon Roost Cavern and the Tower of the Gods are completely different. And there's no dungeon in the entire series quite like Snow Peak. Just this abandoned mansion in the mountains that's now been taken over by squatters. Yeah, these guys. I love them. In addition to unique theming for each dungeon, the best dungeons have a sense of place in the world around them. They feel like they exist not just as a video game level to be beaten by the player, but as a tangible location that has served some in-universe purpose. Think of Arbiter's Grounds, one of my favorite dungeons ever. In Japanese, the name for this dungeon translates to Desert Execution Site. In Spanish, it's Gibbet of the Desert. This is a holding prison for the worst criminals in Hyrule. Criminals awaiting execution. Criminals like Ganondorf. Lanayru mining facility in Skyward Sword is a large industrial factory used by the ancient robots to produce timeshift stones. This is an incredibly important location for the robots, which were the dominant civilization during their time, as we can see from giant statues strewn about the Lanayru region. Speaking of Lanayru mining facility, this dungeon perfectly captures my next point: rewarding the player with big story moments following completion of a dungeon. In Skyward Sword, your quest for the first half of the game is to chase after Zelda. For the first 2 dungeons, you're always just a few steps behind Zelda. You could call it a "thank you, Link, but our princess is in another castle" sort of situation. After seeing Link and Zelda's adorable relationship in the opening act of the game, you want to find Zelda. It's what is propelling you forward in this game. So after completing the game's 3rd dungeon, the aforementioned mining facility, finally you see Zelda. She's just within reach. The only thing separating you and her, a chasm spanned by a bridge. You are then rewarded with this amazingly epic cutscene. Next, I want to talk about what might be the most important aspect of the traditional Zelda dungeon. That is the development of a dungeon's central mechanic. In the older games, typically a dungeon would introduce some new idea that the player hasn't encountered thus far. This might be navigating the city in the sky with the double claw shot, or switching between past and present with the timeshift stones in Skyward Sword. A well-developed mechanic starts off simple. When you board the sand ship, you are in the dusty present. There are timeshift stones that are inaccessible to you. After finding and defeating Skirvo, the robot pirate mini-boss, you acquire the bow. Now you can strike switches that give access to the previously inaccessible timeshift stone. When you do this, it causes certain rooms to be blocked off by electricity. This is when you can use your bow to switch back and forth between past and present, to work your way through the ship, timeshift by timeshift. This development of an idea from its most simple to a complex multi-part puzzle is what made Zelda Dungeons Zelda Dungeons. There are very few games that create dungeons at this level. As influential as Zelda has been on the action and adventure genre, as well as genres outside of itself like the roguelike and Metroidvania, there are shockingly few games that execute on this idea. I think there are many plausible explanations for why this is, but one of the most likely is that it's just incredibly difficult to make dungeons like this. Creating a video game, no matter how seemingly simple, is always going to be a difficult task. To craft intricate 3D levels with dungeon-wide mechanics like this is just something that very few development teams can actually accomplish, like the Zelda team has done for decades. Entering a new Zelda dungeon is a feeling unlike any other. The intrigue, the anticipation, not knowing what you'll find. As you progress from room to room, uncovering secrets, solving puzzles, memorizing the layout of the dungeon, you slowly begin to understand it inside and out. Each puzzle presents an opportunity to interact with the world, and when everything clicks and you solve it, oh, it's so good. Reaching the mini-boss is usually a sign you've made it to the halfway point. Upon defeating the dungeon boss, you hear a triumphant fanfare, signaling your accomplishment. This sense of exploring an unknown place, unraveling a mystery, and eventually overcoming all the obstacles within is what makes Zelda games so satisfying. The dungeons of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take quite a different approach from the old ones. Both games' dungeons require the player to interact with 4 terminals strewn about the area, gated by puzzles. Interacting with all 4 terminals gives access to the central terminal from which the boss emerges to confront Link. This approach, much like the games themselves, is entirely open-ended. You can do any terminal in any order you choose. No barriers, obstacles, or any other bits of intentional design encourage a player to choose one terminal over the others. We'll talk more about this open-ended design in just a moment, but first, I want to talk about the various strengths and weaknesses of the new Zelda dungeons. When it comes to visual design, Breath of the Wild is unfortunately not good. The problem is, due to the narrative, the Divine Beasts were all constructed in the same time period by one civilization, the ancient Sheikah. This means they all function in a nearly identical way, with the exact same design aesthetics. I don't want to be too negative here, but this aesthetic dilemma appears to me as a way to save time for the development team under the guise of narrative excuse. The beasts were constructed as war machines to fight against Calamity Ganon, so you might argue that utility was far more important than aesthetic. To which I say, yes, but in that case they might as well have just been brown boxes on wheels. They were already fashioned in the shape of animals associated with each race's home region. Nothing prevented the Sheikah from going a step further to give them a more unique look in a way that respectfully honors the race to which they were gifted. Why not give them a little bit of elemental color, or emblazon the emblems of each race, or just something? Anything at all besides drab brown. This is an aspect that Tears of the Kingdom largely improved on from Breath of the Wild. Each dungeon does have a unique design, reflecting the region you'll find it in, and there's not really any instance where you might confuse one with another. Except maybe the water temple, which looks just like a regular sky island. The water temple in this game overall just sucks, and I'll get frustrated if I talk about it any more than I have to, so I'll just leave it at that. What I appreciate much more in Breath of the Wild is the music found in the Divine Beasts. Each one features a bit more characteristic instrumentation. Va Rudania in Death Mountain includes pitched percussion instruments that remind us of the connection to the Gorons. Va Meadow is constructed around the lush, naturalistic sound of the string section, the violins creating updrafts with ascending and descending scales. The Divine Beasts are the graves of the fallen champions. Each musical piece carries a melancholic weight to it, a grave uneasiness that reminds us of the final moments each champion suffered to the Blight Ganons. And what I love most about the music in Breath and Tears' dungeons is that each piece has multiple variations that trigger whenever you activate a terminal. From the first moment you set foot on a beast and hear solo piano with fragments of synths creating an eerie atmosphere, all the way up to when you activate the last terminal and the instrumentation is at its fullest and most intense. This is absolutely something that needs to carry over in future Zelda dungeons. A little more mixed in both Breath and Tears are the enemies. Especially in Breath, enemy variety was already a common criticism. This was slightly improved with Tears, adding several classic enemies from previous games. But still, in both games, the main enemy types you come across in dungeons are Guardians and Malescoop in Breath of the Wild, and Constructs in Tears of the Kingdom. The same enemies you find in shrines. This, along with the visual design problem of Breath of the Wild, just exacerbates the disappointing feeling of sameness you get from playing these dungeons. There are no unique enemies in any of the dungeons, and just generally speaking, there are way too few enemies at all in the dungeons. The Blight Ganons of Breath of the Wild were, and probably forever will remain, disappointing. They are all the same recycled idea. And just like what I said when talking about the visual design of the Divine Beasts, they could have easily come up with a reason for the Blights to all look vastly different. Or just don't give a reason. It's a video game. You don't have to have any reason for giving us varied enemies. They're just more fun that way. Again, Tears of the Kingdom vastly improves on this aspect. Colgera, Marbled Goma, Queen Gibdo, this little freak. They're not really difficult at all, but don't tell me you weren't hyped when skydiving through the air towards Colgera, bow in hand, with this song playing. Now to talk about the aspects that are mostly negative in both games. First, the story. Remember the linear mining facility from Skyward Sword? That epic cutscene at the Temple of Time? Or this creepy scene you get in Twilight Princess after beating the Lakebed Temple. That's what we came to expect from completing dungeons in the old games. The newer games, you get not much. It's perhaps an overall problem with the packaging of the story in Breath that you already know the entire plot from King Rome. He tells you on the Great Plateau in the first hour of the game. So the only reward for completing the dungeons in Breath of the Wild is a short interaction with the champions. But even that is better than what we got in Tears of the Kingdom. The exact same scene 4 times. I don't need to belabor this point, as the internet has harped on it for 3 years now, but it's just so bad, it baffles the mind. Of course, the most important aspect for a dungeon is the way it's actually designed. The layout, the construction of the puzzles, the way the invisible hand of the developer guides the player along. This is also the area that Breath of the Wild most deviates from prior Zelda games. The Divine Beasts are ultimately puzzle boxes, not too dissimilar from the puzzle boxes of older Zeldas. The central mechanic of these sorts of dungeons revolves around changing the layout of the dungeon itself. Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening is a great example of this. The player needs to destroy supporting pillars of the tower in order to access new areas and eventually reach the dungeon boss. Compare this to Breath of the Wild, where the 4 required terminals can be activated by manipulating the beast itself in order to solve each terminal's puzzle. Setting the height and angle of Varuta's trunk controls the water level in various parts of the interior, granting access to the terminals. The main difference between older puzzle boxes and the Divine Beasts is the linear design within. Generally speaking, the older dungeons have a set order to complete the puzzles and progress through the level. There are typically barriers to the player's progression that can only be overcome with the dungeon's item. Remember, all the items you need to access any part of the game in Breath and Tears are received in the opening hour or 2. The terminals of the Divine Beasts can be completed in any order you choose, meaning the puzzles are individual and separate. No relation to each other, no increasing difficulty, no mechanics being developed from basic to complex. I don't want to give the impression that the open-ended approach of the Wild era is all bad. It certainly has plenty of benefits. One of the first video games my wife ever beat was Breath of the Wild. I had no idea how her experience would go, but she really was captivated by the game. And the Divine Beasts, while giving her a challenge, never prevented her from completing the game. She did get stuck on Thunderblight Ganon for a week or 2, but she was able to leave Vana Boris and do many other things in the meantime, until she was ready to come back and defeat him. Since finishing Breath of the Wild back in 2019, I've had her try various other Zeldas. She didn't make it to Skyview Temple, the first dungeon in Skyward Sword. She almost got to the end of Twilight Princess's Forest Temple. and I don't think she even left Outset Island in The Wind Waker. Each time, I admittedly would get a little frustrated. These are some of my favorite games, and I suppose it's only natural to feel disappointment when someone you care about doesn't resonate with them the same way. When I asked her what it was about the older games that she didn't like as much, she explained it's the way you have to do a specific thing in order to make progress. She liked that no matter what she did in Breath of the Wild, it felt like she was improving, making progress of some sort. And this is exactly the benefit of prioritizing player freedom. Players constrained by time, skill, or just mental bandwidth can play Breath of the Wild and generally have a good time. Because of the way the game meets them where they're at, the friction that traditional dungeons impose on a player is removed. However, this lack of intentionally linear, restrictive design is a flaw when it comes to the dungeons themselves, and here are the reasons why I consider it so. First, in a game where player freedom is the chief concern, it would make sense that the dungeons should also follow this philosophy. However, Breath and Tears, as they exist currently, don't even follow this philosophy in every situation. Shrines are enclosed spaces that don't allow Link to climb every surface like the rest of the game does. And in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, the developers only allow you to use Zonai devices found within the shrine itself. Why couldn't the dungeons also do so? Other examples from Breath of the Wild are the Great Plateau and Eventide Island. Two fan-favorite areas, these are also maybe the areas with the most restrictions, the most linear gameplay, and the most intentional design. The open-air design of Breath and Tears are really spectacular for giving players room to breathe, unparalleled moments of player expression, and creating a sense of grand adventure. Nothing prevents the developers from including more intentional design in their dungeons in the future, though. Secondly, Zelda fans play Zelda games for a reason. Every fan will have a different order of priorities, but generally, dungeons are at the top for most. This is because, at least in the case of the older games, the dungeons are a good 70% of the gameplay, at least. Yes, there is exploration, puzzles in the overworld, characters to meet, side quests to complete, but dungeons have always been the core of the Zelda experience. I appreciate all the steps Nintendo took to make Breath of the Wild more open to new fans. Obviously, it worked. Breath of the Wild is the best-selling Zelda ever, and it's not even close. But this unnecessarily came at the cost of many longtime fans, myself included, feeling let down. Having the dungeons be this free-form, any-solution-works thing means for most longtime players the dungeons are just trivial. No challenge to complete and no satisfaction at having accomplished something. For Zelda fans, there's not really much out there that scratches the same itch. The combination of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving that Zelda dungeons offer is something unique to this series. If we don't have Zelda, then what are Zelda fans supposed to play? So, why can't the new style of Zelda have dungeons like the traditional games? Well, the answer is they can. Nothing is stopping Nintendo from hybridizing old and new Zelda. With the most recent game, Echoes of Wisdom, we've seen how this could look. 2D Zelda is smaller in scope, a more condensed experience than 3D. But I think this dilemma has to be on the minds of the developers. Going into the release of Tears of the Kingdom, we could already see their thought process reflecting a desire to improve on Breath of the Wild's dungeons. In an Ask the Developers interview, Dota confirmed that dungeons would be unique to their respective environments. Takizawa said, "This time, the dungeons are huge and each carry their own regional look and feel. just like traditional The Legend of Zelda games. We think they will provide a satisfying challenge for players. They wanted to improve from the Divine Beasts, and in many ways they did. From a design perspective, however, they didn't do nearly enough. If Skyward Sword is one end of the spectrum of linearity and developer control over the player's actions, and Breath of the Wild is on the opposite end, I think we might be in store for a readjustment of sorts. Maybe something a little more centered. I think the Zelda team realizes there are weaknesses in the modern approach to Zelda. Aonuma is a designer through and through. His master's degree was composition design, specializing in making karakuri, mechanized puppets. He's an expert in intricate puzzle design, and truly understands how to build 3D environments that are satisfying to unravel. If anyone knows the benefits of intentional design, it's him. Yes, he has made some unfortunate comments recently, chalking the love Zelda fans have for the old games entirely up to nostalgia. But he and the rest of the Zelda team have shown time and again that they really do listen. They've surely seen the dominantly negative online discourse surrounding Tears of the Kingdom over the last 2 years, and of all Nintendo's various development teams, I think the Zelda team really does listen. They can and have responded to feedback, without compromising what makes Zelda Zelda. The Wind Waker was ridiculed for its cartoonish art style. What do we get next? Twilight Princess. Skyward Sword is too linear and hand-holdy. Breath of the Wild is the very next Zelda, complete with an open world and not even a companion character. I think it's highly likely, after seeing the fan reaction to Tears of the Kingdom, that Aonuma and Fujibayashi, who are certainly well into development on the next mainline game, reassessed their approach. And the great thing is, I don't even think that much needs to change from Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom already made improvements from Breath of the Wild. Creating dungeons to be regionally themed is a necessity. Especially if the next Zelda has anything like shrines, dozens of miniature dungeons that share the same aesthetic and music, it will be more important than ever to ensure that dungeons give players a reprieve from this aesthetic, giving us something unique to look forward to. The other thing Tears of the Kingdom did amazingly is the lead up to dungeons. Scaling the mountain summit in Hebra into the sky above with Tulin is a standout. The raw excitement I felt in climbing inch by inch through these platforms in the sky, continually asking myself, how high are we going here? You finally make it above the eye of the storm. You are at the crown of the world itself, and now there's nothing left for it but to skydive into the storm and board the Wind Temple. This was honestly a top 5 Zelda moment for me easily, and my favorite moment from Tears of the Kingdom. The Wind Temple is likely most people's first dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom. The game basically tells you you should go there first. So unfortunately, the following pre-dungeon sequences didn't reach the same level of hype and anticipation as the Hebra regions did. Tears of the Kingdom deserves props for actually experimenting and trying new things in the sequences preceding dungeons. This is much more in line with the traditional Zelda dungeon approach. These sequences are a great base for the next Zelda to build on. I think the length and variety of these sequences are a perfect balance for the dungeons, making everything just feel more substantial. Sometimes, in the case of the Wind Temple, better than the actual dungeons. Tears of the Kingdom also did bosses much, much better, feeling like traditional Zelda bosses. They weren't really difficult, but honestly that's not a huge problem for me. Most old school Zelda bosses also weren't challenging. If you know their weak spot, usually an eye, and how to interact with them using your items, it becomes more of a puzzle than a fight, and that's fine. The main thing I need from Zelda bosses is a sense of scale, cool, unique designs, and banging music. Tears of the Kingdom pretty much got all of these. So all that really leaves for improvement in my mind is in the design and story departments. Let's start with the story. Overall, I think Tears of the Kingdom had some really excellent hype moments in its story. I do unfortunately think that due to the lack of respect for previously established lore, not really feeling like an honest-to-God sequel, and just regurgitating the same plot and narrative structure as Breath of the Wild, the story of Tears of the Kingdom was a letdown. So, in a broad sense, I hope that the next Zelda game just does better with the story in general. I think it will, since I assume they'll start fresh with a new version of Hyrule and new iterations of Link and Zelda. And as Zeltic said on the Zeldudes podcast, the Zelda team does an amazing job at creating mysteries and questions. They rarely do as good of a job at answering those questions. That's generally a problem with fantasy. As soon as you start answering the questions, it loses the magic. Now, with dungeons, it's not complicated. Just give a reason for the place to exist other than video game level. The next Zelda game needs to have properly designed dungeons. If you can simply climb or use whatever Sheikah Slate or Zonai abilities equivalent to cheese your way through puzzles, what is the point of those puzzles? You might as well just make a convenient ramp to where the player needs to get to. Because that's the thing with the anything works approach. Sometimes you can find cool solutions that seem like they weren't intended by the devs, but most often, players will gravitate to the path of least resistance. They will find the easiest, most straightforward solution. And that is hardly ever the most fun, rewarding solution. The wisdom of Civilization 4 lead designer Soren Johnson comes to mind here. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. So what needs to happen is you need to force your players to engage with the puzzles in your dungeons in a way that gives them the feeling of accomplishment. Being able to scale any height by climbing or using your paraglider to skip past enemy encounters, these are all viable solutions to the puzzle that is navigating Hyrule's overworld. This same sort of approach just does not work as well for dungeons that thrive in tightly designed environments. Now, for players like my wife, who have not really jived with the older Zelda games, and something about Breath of the Wild really worked for her, it might sound like I want to sacrifice her ability to enjoy these games for my long-term fan satisfaction. But the thing is, I know a Zelda game exists somewhere in the ether that can satisfy both of those types of players. It might be the one that's in development right now. This Zelda can have shrines and dungeons, with tight, linear, single-solution design to satisfy the old fans like me. And at the same time, it can have open-air exploration, with multi-solution environmental puzzles and combat to make the newer fans happy as well. And for the dungeons, I really think the Zelda team is so incredibly smart and talented. They can find a way to make the freeform problem solving in a more linear fashion that still rewards experimentation. Echoes of Wisdom did this quite well in my opinion. Not perfectly, but it is a great step in the right direction. The next Zelda game could be right around the corner. At the time of recording, we haven't had a full Nintendo Direct yet in 2026. It's been nearly 3 years since Tears of the Kingdom released, and they spent the last year of that development on polishing the physics and ironing out bugs. I really think we'll see our first glimpse of the next mainline Zelda within a year or two. And when we do, I'm confident it'll be glorious. Hey all, Monata Boy in post-production here. Just wanted to hop in here and say a quick word about the Ocarina of Time remake, Originally, this video was going to have a different ending, and I decided to just kind of record a new ending, I suppose. This video started in early February. I had all the scripting and the voiceover recording done by March. And of course, since then, Nate the Hate leaked a supposed Ocarina of Time remake that's supposed to be coming out this year, presumably around like holiday 2026. I think everything I've said in this video still holds true to how I feel. I still think we need to have a kind of recalibration of the non-linear and the linear versions of Zelda, old and new. And I've seen new thumbnails of videos, recent videos of people kind of saying a similar thing, but specifically through the lens of using this Ocarina of Time remake as a test of sorts. And I absolutely agree with that. I don't think I would change anything I've said in this video. If I had known, of course, about this Ocarina of Time remake, I might have framed it differently, but I still hold true to what I've said. And I guess I can just talk about my feelings about the Ocarina of Time remake here without making the video too much longer. If you stuck around this long, thank you so much, of course. I think the most disappointing version of Ocarina of Time that we could get in a remake is just a one-to-one, basically 4K remaster along the lines of Ocarina of Time 3D. We've already had a remaster like that, and I think if you want to play either version of those games, whether the original N64, which still holds up in my opinion, or the 3DS remaster, those are still there. I think, we just need a new version of that game, a new a reinterpretation of that game, and especially, as I said, kind of using this as a opportunity to try to blend the old traditional Zelda style with the new style. I'm not saying I want shrines or Divine Beast versions of Inside the Deku Tree or the Fire Temple or whatever. Like, no, that's absolutely not. But I think we can have this integration of more open world exploration and freeform problem solving, but with the structure that dungeons offer from the older games. So anyways, this video has gone on too long, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it to this point, please like and subscribe and do all that internet engagement stuff. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.